Tonight we're in Bishop Stortford, and welcome to Question Time. And with me tonight, a first appearance by James Brokenshire, Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. He was previously Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Labour's Shadow Attorney General, formerly Director of the human rights group Liberty, Shami Chakrabarti. The leader of the SNP group of MPs at Westminster, Blackford. Jill Rutter, a former civil servant who's also worked for BP, is now a director at the Institute for Government. And the columnist for the Daily Telegraph, former editor of both the Telegraph, the Spectator and the Sunday Telegraph, Charles Moore. And remember, as always, you can argue from home. Our hashtag is BBCQT. We're on Twitter, Facebook, we're on Instagram. I suppose it comes as no surprise to say we have had a host of questions about Brexit, and 104 colleagues of yours who aren't going to vote with the Prime Minister, from what we know.
Well, obviously, I recognise the concerns that some of my colleagues have fairly and appropriately raised in relation to things like the Northern Ireland backstop. That's why the Prime Minister is talking to MPs in terms of how we can give that assurance to them as to the temporary nature of this backstop, how profoundly it does actually support our country moving forward, and therefore the need to ensure that we have that certainty. Because if you don't vote against this...
Why do you call it temporary when the advice that was dragged out from Geoffrey Cox is that the thing would endure indefinitely?
Well,
true. And politicians, and I have to say the Prime Minister in particular, has got an obligation to tell the truth to people. And the Prime Minister stood up in Parliament earlier on this week and said it would be temporary. And yet, we know from the legal advice where it states the following: international law and protocol would endure indefinitely. Now, there is a world of difference. Now, I got into trouble from the Speaker yesterday because
you accused her of lying, didn't you?
Because I had to be careful because of the way that Parliament works. And I did make the point that I did not believe the Prime Minister was being truthful. I'm going to be quite specific tonight. On the basis of what the law officers have told the government, the Prime Minister is lying. She has a responsibility to tell people the truth. And she hasn't done
Rutter, let's just hear your take on this.
Just on the backstop, I think the really interesting thing is, yes, it's temporary, that's part of the language, but it could be indefinite. So what sort of, moves from being indefinite into temporary? That's to find a way out of the backstop. And the way you get out of the backstop is for it to be superseded by the UK's future trading relationship with the EU. And the really difficult thing is to say, actually, what is the landing zone that would allow you to have a trading relationship with the EU that removes the need for the backstop? So the Prime Minister tried. That's what her Chequers proposal, people called it a deal, it was a proposal, tried to do. It tried to say, actually, what sort of relationship do we need with the EU that would remove the need for the backstop? The problem with the Chequers deal is the EU has made pretty clear it doesn't like the Chequers deal. The other things you could do a Norway Plus arrangement, that sort of arrangement people have been talking about, joining the single market and a customs union. You could decide to leave Northern Ireland behind. The EU has made it clear that it's very happy to countenance leaving Northern Ireland in that arrangement and GB going off into Canada.
I mean, the point is that if you don't have identical customs arrangements for the whole UK, then you have a problem with Northern Ireland because there's a land border.
So you need two sorts of things, you need three sorts of things, but you really need two sorts of things to avoid that. You need to be in a customs territory, so you avoid being different customs areas, and you need to avoid regulatory checks. That's the other thing that the EU insists on having between their single market and the third country,
understandably, because otherwise people smuggle across the border.
So it's a question. We can get out of it if we can find a way to create that future trading relationship.
Okay. Let's hear from one or two members of the audience, and then I'll come to you. Yes, you, sir, in the shirt in the second row there. You happy with the way things are going?
No, I think as of this morning, there was 104 Tory MPs who said they can't support the government's view.
Yes.
So when are the government going to get real and accept that this isn't going to go through?
Well, if you were the Prime Minister, wouldn't you want to test the House of Commons and fight till the end and see how it worked out? Or would you start changing things? What? I know
there's no point in being Don Quixote and tilting at windmills. Let's have something that will work.
All right.
And this is why Mrs May's deal cannot possibly work, because that backstop, whatever is being argued, is permanent or potentially permanent, and it is an annexation of part of our country. It does exactly what Mrs May said she wouldn't allow, which is to put the part of the border of the United Kingdom down the Irish Sea, cutting off part of our country.
And two pretty major things happened. The first was shameful, which is that for the first time in this country's history, the government was found in contempt of Parliament. Right? That's like being in contempt of the law and the court. If, you know, you don't get in your community to just ignore a binding order of a local magistrate, but Mrs May and her colleagues, forgive me, thought it was OK to ignore a binding vote in the House of Commons. Why? Because they wanted to hide the attorney's legal advice that explained the implications of the agreement, and in particular, and Charles is right about this as a matter of law rather than politics. You know, politics can come and go and change, and you can make all sorts of promises, but as a matter of law, the backstop takes you into a locked room and only the EU holds the key.
The same customs arrangement in Northern Ireland as you have in Britain, then you're making a division between Northern Ireland and Britain, and you're breaking up the union.
Yes, the backstop.
Do you agree with that?
The backstop definitely.
I hate this word backstop. I wish we could call it a safety net.
The safety net. The Germans actually call it safety net. That's what the German word is for it. The insurance policy, if you like, does effectively have a different regime. Northern Ireland would stay in the single market, or some elements of the single market, in long term. And I think the issue that I think Charles is absolutely right on, that I think is very strange, is Northern Ireland would find those rules being made for it in Brussels. The UK government wouldn't be there to argue for it. So it's a really interesting question of who would be arguing for it. It would still be under the ECJ. So I think, yes, it is
and
really
I want to go back to Shami, so she was halfway through.
To the answer the lady about Labour, we wouldn't have all this problem with the backstop, etc., because we want the whole of the United Kingdom to be in a permanent customs union with the EU. So we wouldn't have these. No, I know that some people disagree with that, but it is an answer to the Northern Ireland question. We cherish the Good Friday Agreement. It was hard won, and we will not have a hard border on the island of Ireland.
Yeah, but will the deal be rejected, and what should we do? Because I think what we do know from the government's analysis, that every form of Brexit is going to make the UK poorer.
So what's going to happen?
Less opportunities. Well,
what's going to happen?
I think what will happen, David, is I think on Tuesday that Parliament will vote this down. And I think that Parliament will also vote to push through the amendment that's come through from Hilary Benn, which will state that none of us wish to be in a situation where there's no deal. So in a sense, what will happen, because we've had a government which has failed to bring forward a plan that works, is that Parliament has to, if I can put it this way, take back control. So as the opposition in some respects, we're getting the ball. And it's up to us as to what we do with that. I actually personally think, on the basis of the information that we now know, that it's far better to stay in the European Union than it is to leave. And if we have to go back to the people of the United Kingdom and ask them that question again, that's what we should do. Because quite simply, I would say to every member of Parliament, and this is irrespective of how people voted in 2016, if you go through the lobbies next Tuesday to vote this deal through, you're doing that fulsome in the knowledge that you're supporting a plan that is going to make people redundant.
All right. The chairman of the 22 committee, a powerful man, Graham Brady, said today he wants the vote deferred, not taken on Tuesday.
No, well, that's not what we're going to do. We're in the midst of 5 days...
Why don't you want to listen to him? He's got the ear of the Conservative...
We're in the midst of 5 days of debate in relation to the Brexit deal, and the vote is coming on Tuesday.
Well, look, I think at the end of the day, every single member of Parliament has got a responsibility to their constituents. And we know from the analysis that's been provided by the UK government, by the Scottish government, by many others, that in all scenarios, that the economy would be poorer under Brexit than it would be under the status quo. And I think the responsibility that we've got as MPs is to be honest with all of you and say, OK, however you voted in that referendum in 2016, we now know of the price that's going to be paid. And quite simply, I don't believe that unemployment is a price worth paying. That's what happened under the Tories with Thatcher. And I'm not prepared to turn around people in Bishop Stortford and in Scotland. Fraser of Allender have told us that on a no-deal scenario, that 80,000 Scots could lose their jobs. There'd be £600 a year on average poorer. That is a disgrace that any government is prepared to sit back and allow that to happen. And they do have to explain the circumstances.
The man in the middle there, you
so
say, yes.
I'm saying to everybody, staying in is the best option.
Jill Rutter.
I wanted to come back to the original question, because I think what's really interesting about what happens next Tuesday is that this is supposed to be the meaningful vote. Parliament wrested the right to have that meaningful vote away from the government, which wasn't very keen about giving Parliament a say on the terms of the deal. But actually, it's really quite interesting, because if the Hilary Benn amendment passes, which Ian was talking about, MPs won't actually even vote on the Prime Minister's deal, because if that passes, they'll vote on that. So we won't know what they think of the Prime Minister's deal.
Jill,
and what's really interesting...
One second, because this is important. If we back the Hilary Benn amendment, the beginning
Just
of that
tell us the Hilary Benn amendment in 10 words.
It basically votes down the Prime Minister's deal and says that Parliament must not allow a no deal to happen. That's what it does, but it explicitly votes down what the government's
And what's really
forward.
interesting is there was another amendment that was passed on the government's sort of Black Tuesday when it lost all those votes.
Dominic Grieve.
It was a Tuesday, which is the Dominic Grieve amendment, which basically said that rather than just take note of what the government planned to do, Parliament could take control and actually lay substantive amendments saying what should happen next.
We need to look at the reasons why we thought about Brexit, and that's because we have a divided country. Two of the things that were mentioned were taking back control. We've already sold everything off to foreign people, and also immigration. And the reason why immigration was a problem was because it wasn't carefully thought through, and because we don't have enough good training systems for our own people, and our productivity is much lower than other competitive countries, and so we rely on cheap labour to boost it up. You can argue all these elegant arguments for as long as you like, but you need to deal with the real problem, which is we are a divided country. There's too much disparity.